Before we start the episode, we want to let you know that we're going to be talking about sexual assault, rape, and attempted suicide. Please take care while listening.
Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about
building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
It's almost impossible to find a person that tried to deal with the aftermath of sexual violence that they didn't find that dealing with aftermath, reaching out for help, is dangerous.
Welcome to the Curious Fox podcast. For those challenging the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla. And today we're talking with Danijela Steinfeld, a Serbian-born award-winning actress and filmmaker who's a director and producer of the documentary film Hold Me Right. The film explores the traumatic aftermath and healing process for victims and perpetrators of sexual violence. Interweaving Danijela's personal story with multiple interviews from sexual assault survivors, perpetrators, and activists, Hold Me Right creates space for difficult conversations about power, rape culture, and the stigma that comes with sexual abuse.
Danijela happens to be a good friend of mine. I've known her for the best part of a decade. I vaguely knew her story. I knew that she was a famous actor in her home country. I knew she was assaulted, which caused her to leave Serbia and seek refuge in the US. And I knew she was working on a film about this. But I didn't get to see the final cut until recently. And frankly, it blew me away. I've known that this documentary was a part of her healing journey, and her determination in making it, despite all odds, has been inspiring. This film is powerful. And at the end of this episode, we'll give you a code that you can use to stream it. While Danijela's experience happened in Serbia, it made me curious about the statistics around sexual assault in the US. And they're staggering, to say the least. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 1 in 5 women in the US experience completed or attempted rape during their lifetime. 1 in 3 of these experienced it for the first time between the ages of 11 and 17. Nationwide, 81% of women and 43% of men reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment or assault in their lifetime. About half of the female victims of rape reported being raped by an intimate partner, and over 40% by an acquaintance.
I'm a part of these statistics. After watching the documentary and having a conversation with Danijela, I felt compelled to confront some experiences that happened to me when I was younger. In particular, there were 2 situations of sexual assault that I experienced around the age of 16, one of which was reoccurring, and neither of which I've talked about. I'm not ready to talk about it right now on the show for the first time, but I've acknowledged that I should be talking about it with my therapist or my wife or partner at some point, or honestly, even just saying it out loud to myself when I'm alone. Over the last 25 years, as soon as the thought or memory popped into my head, I pushed it back down as the emotional weight of it has felt too hard to carry. But I know that just because I'm not addressing it, and frankly, because I am not addressing it, I am carrying the weight of it. I have never explored how these sexual assaults have impacted my view on my body, my power, my sexuality, my shame, my desire, or anything else. And it's not something that I've been willing to deal with. And our conversation with Danijela has allowed a little bit of light to enter into that dark space. And hopefully in time, I will be able and willing to talk about it with the people around me.
Danijela talks about how sexual assault starts way before the incident itself. There are often systemic and circumstantial power dynamics in place that result in the incident. The stories of assault start months, sometimes years before the assault itself. So, we wanted to start with Danijela's story.
I was born in a village in a war-torn Serbia, and I couldn't ever imagine that I would have opportunities in life. We were raised to know that it's not going to go well, basically, because Serbia was under the war. We were under sanctions and embargo. We couldn't leave the country. And being raised in a double minority family in a far out village in the middle of like kind of a nationalistic war. It was a very, very strange thing growing up, but I had a beautiful childhood. I am mentioning this because it was a humongous turn of events to be accepted to the acting conservatory in Belgrade. Hundreds and hundreds of people apply and only 10 people getting in. So definitely some person that comes from a village that nobody has ever heard of in Serbia. Nobody, including myself, including my parents, including any candidate that I met there throughout like this ridiculous process of narrowing us down, thought that I could ever get in just because of my heritage and my accent. It was just unheard of. So we were all surprised. It took me 3 days after I was accepted to realize what has happened. So when I got accepted, when people were just like screaming and cheering and my parents celebrating like this ridiculous fact, I did not feel anything. It took me like 3 days to actually understand that like, oh, because the whole system of the 18-year-old Danijela was set up like there's not going to be opportunity. So it took really long time to understand it like, oh, I got an opportunity. So one happened and it was miraculous. And I had a beautiful career as an actress in Serbia. I worked in television, made movies, and I mostly worked in theater. And I was very young when I was tenured. I was one of the youngest people that was ever tenured in national theater in Serbia, which was a humongous honor. And I was the very first person that ever quit from that position, because you don't have to quit, of course, if you're tenured. It's very hard to quit from, kind of an intangible position such as an actor in a national theater. And I quit because I happened to, at the height of my career, I happened to be held captive and raped by a powerful politician who happened to be my colleague. So he was actor and politician. He is actor, not a politician anymore. But think about like Trump or Reagan or some kind of a famed person that kind of works in both places. And so we were acting in both in leading roles opposite each other in a kind of a show that has been going for a while. And I got so accustomed to my country's culture, which is extreme, like misogyny and sexism is just kind of a daily tapestry, and I couldn't even differentiate. And I did not know that I really did not know that I'm equal to a man. I thought that like woman is something else. It's kind of a function. And even though I kind of explored and expressed and engaged myself into contemporary theater pieces that are extremely progressive, and my characters were extremely progressive, back then I did not know what I did not know, which is that my understanding is that the only setting to a woman is to be second to. So, as I said, the hard thing was to differentiate that my friend, I thought that the perpetrator at the time was my friend and colleague, and we worked really well, and that his consistent kind of sexual propositions and inappropriate comments and grooming, basically, there's so many gaslighting. He was just kept on telling me for months, you were like, you need to be sexually liberated. I can help you. You're stiff on stage. And meanwhile, I was actually, that show was known for kind of me being recognized by the critics as like extremely far out, sexually liberated person. There was one particular scene that was not like explicit, but definitely had so much raw intimacy and expression in sex scene that we had like middle-aged ladies in that moment, because it was kind of so, as I said, everybody apparently, production was happy what I was doing, and critics praised, and middle-aged ladies were leaving the theater on my panting, which was a show that I did a good job. But the perpetrators kind of gaslighting, kind of a grooming narrative was that he needs to help me with it. And I didn't buy it. And anyways, maybe I'm going too far into the details, but I think that it's important for all of us to always understand that sexual violence starts before sexual violence. Sexual violence starts long ago. These are not like isolated incidents. And so eventually, long story short, this is the first time I found myself alone with him in a car. He took me somewhere where I didn't know where I was, on my crying and yelling and threatening and also just kind of couldn't recognize that this is my friend. And also, but the bottom line, when I was going there, it was kind of, for me, still don't know how long that drive was, whether it was 20 minutes or 40 minutes. It was hard to understand the time because my brain was losing it. I just couldn't understand that this person, or anybody actually, with such myself in a such lulled public voice, like I came from zero protection, zero safety, zero dignity into like 0.01% of population of Serbia that can have some sense of protection in that crazy country. Because I was a known actor, I was able to kind of always get the seat of the table or get anybody on the phone that I possibly wanted. So and kind of when your face sits on billboards for years, then you somehow just think that like nothing like truly bad can happen to you. I mean, you just that's what you think. Sitting in that car, I realized that like it's going to be an uncomfortable night, but I could never imagine if you can like freeze me and stop me in that moment and ask me like what's going to happen. I was like, it's going to be really uncomfortable. He's just going to be very, very persistent and going to have advances and maybe attempt to, grope me or whatever, but it will never be rape. Like this cannot happen just straight up for all these reasons. So that was a very strange, to say the least, turn of events. And I did not know where I was, did not know how to get out. And I was tortured for a long time, physically, sexually, psychologically, emotionally. And then, there's many holes that I don't remember. So sometimes these moments are coming in form of flashbacks. And I remember the kind of how we got back into the car. I don't remember. I just don't remember the light when the doors open. And he, for the first time, that night had a smile on his face. And his wife was calling him. There was a cell phone and it was always like buzzing, and he was driving home and he started to hold my hand and he said to sing him songs. So I did. And he was just like smiling and kind of warm smile suddenly. Yeah. And he dropped me near my house. It was like 4 or 5 a.m. And I remember, I shared that moment, I believe in my documentary, sharing my story. The moment when I like stepped on the ground coming from his car was like, I will never forget that moment. It was just everything was there. I was just so happy to be alive. It was so good to just like hold my feet on the ground. It's like I was able to walk. And that was just such a success in that moment.
I can't even begin to imagine how this must feel. Do you remember what happened next?
So I was able finally to look at my phone. This is like 4 or 5 a.m., something like that. And I had a friend in New York. Somebody was like on and off dating, but a friend. And it was like 10 p.m. for them. And so my G-chat automatically, as I turned on my phone or like kind of opened it, got green. And then my friend asked me like, what are you doing up? Because this was somebody that I have been dating, I think that was kind of instinct was like, kind of like, I need that security. So I was trying to tell him on a chat what has happened, but I was, of course, extremely confused. I felt very guilty and I felt very scared. I was so uncertain, like I knew that I needed help. So the stage of shock was completely overwhelming. My body, my brain was not functioning. I know that very well. It was very, very, there's like a matter of like, one part of the brain is very matter of fact, such as like okay, hospital rape kit, and kind of like, and run from the country. That was immediately kind of that execution. And then there was all sorts of systems that are, because of the violence and trauma, the brain shuts down. So my systems were still kind of coming up, basically, kind of turning on. So there's many parts of us which is very hard, also very harsh for us in the context of like a legal system of proving something, what we remember, what we don't remember, why we reacted the way we did. It's very hard to explain. And of course, science have proven it over and over again about like what brain does in traumatic moment. And especially if there's so much confusion for the system, because everything that was safe suddenly is not. So every signal of like, this is my friend, this is my community, this is my country, this is where I belong, this is where I'm celebrated, I loved, needed, wanted, respected. All of the every relationship that means a kind of like a colleague or friend, all of that is just placed upside down. So it's very hard to kind of reason in those moments. But I did have, as I said, I had a chat, like a sense of like, okay, I need to collect evidence, and I need to do a rape kit, and I need to run from the country. But however, the biggest wound was like my being was just dead, basically, and like dehumanized and ruined. So I needed some kind of a sense of embrace, but I was afraid that like a raped being damaged. This is what I understood, that like this date in New York, that I really need to tell him what has happened, that he will reject me the moment that he hears. So it was a very difficult, I needed help, but I'm so afraid of suffering more consequences for being raped. Then after I kind of got myself, so that chat still, we still have that chat. It's really, he understood that it's rape. I couldn't say it, but it's very painful also to watch me how many times I apologized and was just so horrifically scared. And I understood that I want to do a rape kit, and I understood that, like, Googled a bit, realized that if I do go to the hospital, every single nurse will just route that this known actress came to our hospital for rape kit. And then I was thinking of private clinic and bribing, which is very way of operating in Serbia, and like, should I try that? And then I realized that like if anybody is asking for rape kit, which is probably in the like 10 years ago in Serbia, it's like 2 maybe a year, because nobody was reporting rape, nobody was talking about it. Mm-hmm. I knew that like by the law, whoever it is, they will call the police. Actually, not because Serbians are so care to follow their law. It's just because it's still, even day to day, after I've spoken up and many brave women spoken up, the ingrained thing is if somebody tells you that they've been sexually violated, assaulted, or raped, you should question their credibility. That's kind of so deeply ingrained. So that's the first thing that's like, wait a second. So luckily, actually for me, I did not call for help and did not go anywhere. I don't think that I would be with you guys today. What would happen is that this will go to the media. He was a really powerful politician at the time, and this will be all decimated. And I was in such state of shock, so shredded. Like, I just did not have anything that can say like a Danijela. It was just all like shredded into pieces. I needed to pick myself up together, back to whole self. It took many years, but by the time like I was just I was so broken that I would just not survive the direct kind of outlash.
How old are you, Danijela?
So 27.
27. So I mean, young, right? This is the other, like, young with with not that much experience.
I feel that, like, I knew better. I'd been through, as a 27-year-old, I definitely, I lived in Belgrade for many years. I've been through Belgrade is also rough space for young women and young artists. And So I thought that I definitely knew better, that I could definitely judge a situation and character. So that was also that's why my inner, like innate sense of judgment was broken, because it wasn't that happened to me when I did not have any reflection to the world, and kind of basically just perception was, when you're young, you don't have anything to compare anything to, but I definitely knew better. So that was a very, very, very strange.
I find when I hear these stories, just the layers of damage that goes beyond that one experience of being sexually assaulted. It's like, it not only just like breaks you in that moment, but it breaks the connection with yourself, a connection with others, your sense of safety, your sense of self. So it's such a damaging crime. It's such a damaging attack that I don't think, even when people say, oh, someone was raped, I don't think we understand the depth of the damage, that how deep it goes, and how deep and how wide it goes, right? Because it's not just the person that is affected. It definitely like breaks them, shreds them down to their core, but then it has a blast radius of all the people around you that are also affected. How was your experience in terms of like the depth and the blast radius?
Well, I didn't want that to be my reality, so I thought if I would flee to the States and show up not knowing, I knew two people in New York basically at the time. Nobody will know this. Nobody, why would I have to have, I don't have to know this. This can go all behind, and that's it. Mm-hmm. It's gone. It's solved. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's the solution. So that was my plan, and I was very euphoric about it. I was just like, from the worst kind of experience that felt that completely broke me, I can just revive and forget about it. Why? And of course, that solution is amazing. So okay, let's do that as soon as possible. So I was begging theater to let me go, made some false excuses, and I found myself in New York. Again, euphoric, not sleeping, drinking a lot. I'm not a drinker. Never felt drunk with that drinking, but I definitely consistently was euphoric, drinking, not sleeping, zero appetite. And then somewhere I just went one day towards the subway, and some noise, maybe it was a black car that like reminded me of all black cars were reminding me of his for a really long time. And I just lost breathing, like completely lost breathing, had no idea why. And people were trying to help me at the street, and I was like, I'm fine. It was so strange. I kept on thinking like maybe I swallowed something in it. So I keep, just not connecting at all. I see that, I definitely remember myself understanding that like I am a different type of person right now. Like I cannot recognize myself from that day on. Like everything that it was just, my reactions were odd, unrecognizable to myself. Like just in general, the way I acted, the way I handled myself, my thought process. So after a couple of panic attacks that I did not know that are panic attacks, and I called a hotline, and I shared to some anonymous person. It was a male voice, deep male voice. And I was sharing it maybe somehow like matter of fact as I'm sharing it with you, but they broke down and started crying. That's the first time that like with that witness, I started to like feel, oh my goodness, this is horrible, and I have no idea how to get out and how to live. So it was that cry for help was two things. I did actually get help and free counseling, but the fact that this male person, which was somehow important to me at the time, kind of they cried instead of me. That's something give me a permission to kind of embrace myself and kind of say that like this is not okay. It took me a year of counseling to start to like, wait a second, well maybe also the rapist did something wrong. So the matter of how much I was blaming myself because I knew better, because I saw, like I should have seen the signs. Mm-hmm. I should have fight it, even though the guy has like a black belt. But it says, I mean, this is, yes, also just for the listeners, the fight, like fighting back in the types of sexual violence this is not a matter of strength or who is bigger. Sexual violence is not about sex. It has nothing to do about sex or about our sex organs. It's all abuse of power. So sexual violence, as I said, happens before the sexual violent act. That starts before, and it has to do with abuse of power. And in order to abuse power onto somebody, you have to kind of overpower them power dynamically. So that happens so long before, and so there's nothing to do much with strength, meaning that like I can clearly see being assaulted by, you know, like a person that is just double smaller than I am, if that makes sense.
I imagine that the power dynamics didn't just impact you in that moment, it also impacted you in the aftermath. Did you feel like you were in danger even after the sexual assault was over?
Actually, that's kind of is a beautiful prelude to our film, Hold Me Right. That's your question is the very question that pointed me out to make a film, because it's impossible to navigate that space. So it's almost impossible to find a person that tried to deal with the aftermath of sexual violence that they didn't find that dealing with aftermath, reaching out for help, is dangerous. It's very hard. I don't remember. I interviewed 400, or screened 400 and interviewed 40 victims of rape. And none of them told me that it wasn't dangerous to seek for help.
You mean like it felt dangerous to actually say out loud what happened and ask for help?
Not that it felt dangerous. It still is dangerous. So what I'm trying to say that like you are seeking help, you might feel guilty, ashamed, broken. And when you seek for help, you are being asked for your responsibility, kind of your accountability for why somebody assaulted you. Questions that imply shame, questions that imply judgment onto your actions, disbelief. And that all kind of feels that you've been raped over again, because again, there's some kind of confirmation that like, well, you should have, somebody should have abused your power, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know how to put in a better, clear words, but it's an impossible maze to go through. So how to navigate a space where for you to, when you're reaching out for help, for you to feel that you will be seen, heard, not judged. It's impossible. People, the questions such as like, wait a second, did you really rape you? Did you fight? Why didn't you tell anybody then? Or did you tell anybody, but why didn't you, all of this implies that you kind of contributed to somebody deciding and acting abusively and violently towards you and your body and your humanity, your choice, your will, your power.
It's like there's what happened and there's the echoes of it as you try to tell your story and get your help. And then the backlash of that is kind of making you relive that trauma.
Yeah. In other words, we have, unfortunately, because we live in a culture of stigma and silence and disbelief and shame about these issues. One thing is to get over trauma. The other thing is to get over kind of judgment but the lack of support would be easy. Like if somebody just like if there is just silence from another side, that will be easy. But when there is judgment, you should have. Yes. So that traumatizes us. That's called secondary victimization, and it's very unfortunate that it's almost impossible to find somebody that haven't been gone through it, and that's the answer to the question why we are silent, because it's dangerous to seek for help. You have to deal with two sets of traumas. One is surviving violence. The other one is surviving asking for help.
Yeah. What comes up for me is what happens to you, the violence, and then it's the abandonment, which is traumatizing. And I don't mean in abandonment also like not seeing you, in judgment, in so the sort of bigger sense of abandonment, like something really bad happens to you and then you're abandoned for it and because of it. And I think that is tragic. That is traumatic on its own. We know that abandonment is a core trauma for the human psyche. So you have an actual violence that's happened to you, and that is traumatizing. And there's an opportunity, actually, we know how trauma works. If in that moment you were supported and loved and seen and heard, that trauma would sit differently in your body. But I think what happens is, from what I'm hearing from you, is a secondary to the trauma, you are then abandoned and kind of tossed out and judged and unseen, unheard, accused, and all those things. And that, to me, like, big ball of just abandoned out there, which means that you're now left with your trauma. And that means that the trauma is like stuck in your body, into your bones, into the fiber of your being. And then you have to deal with that as well.
Right. It's confirmation from the society. This should have happened to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was your situation. And then you did something very, very brave. You said, at least this is what I understand from your story. You said, I'm not doing this. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to give everybody a voice. And this is something that we need to talk about. Can you speak a little bit to how you went from your experience, how you went from your own healing journey, your own trying to process what's happened to you, into deciding that you want to make a film about it?
I was in the kind of rock bottom in my life. I had symptoms of PTSD that were on a daily basis. And so that's being, as I mentioned, insomnia, panic attacks, inability to meet new people, inability to go to auditions. If I went to audition and saw anybody that would be even close to an appearance of the perpetrator or having any kind of like a macho masculine appear, I would froze. So I couldn't work, I couldn't socialize, I couldn't be in a car without having a panic attack or on highway, I couldn't fly on planes. And I just was so dysfunctional and in silence. I didn't want to burden my family with what has happened. They would be crushed. And how bad how poorly I was dealing with existing. So I planned suicide for a long time, and I attempted suicide. And I was miraculously saved because I hid my suicide note really badly, apparently, and my friend found it. And before I was able to do it, they called police. I called the police back, telling them it's a false alarm, thinking that they will not show up. This is LA, California. I was like hiding from my New York friends in order to attempt suicide. And I was arrested and somehow got myself out of it. I was thinking that like, okay, well, next time I'm going to do it right. But meanwhile, I did this long silence was alarming to my friends in New York, and they reached out and something cracked. I didn't want to tell them exactly what's going on, but something cracked in my sharing, and they realized that I'm just definitely not okay, and they do everything that they could to get me to New York, which was actually took me like a month of some counseling, free counseling. All of this time, actually, I just want to mention that from New York and LA, I was getting free counseling, which was life-saving. I know that now, but I fought hard to get that free counseling, but without it, I would not be here today. So the counseling for after suicide was just to try, like, how can I get on a plane and not have panic attack to like completely crash me. So to get myself to New York, and I did. It was funny. It was like a red eye from LA, which is, everybody is sleeping, and me, Daniela, is for 6 hours, just like wide open eyes, like so excited that I made it, like that I managed to like breathe. So for 6 hours, I was just like excited that I'm breathing through this, didn't close my eyes for a second. And that like I'm going towards my saving. towards being, being held and saved and in my friend's arms. And that's exactly what happened. And I shared what has happened to me. And my friends shared that they will be here for me unconditionally. I can stay in their house no matter how long I need. I can show up no matter how, in any shape and form. I had just the symptoms of PTSD can be just extremely troubling for people around us, and it's very difficult. And they imposed a safe and nurturing and loving space, and that was my first safety. And it was so much that I wanted to live again. And then I was thinking, wait a second. So all that is needed for healing, overcoming, and empowering a survivor of trauma is a loving support. That's the cure. And that's it. And I was just had such a, weeks long aha moment that it was I have to do something. People need to know about it. The cure is free, cheap, and accessible, and it does wonders. It can empower us all. So I was just okay, I have to share this story. And how better to share the story, but with kind of diverse type of voices and experience that all share the same experience. We have, so in my documentary about healing after sexual violence, I was grateful to have voices from so many different backgrounds, the men and women, different circumstances, different ages, different accounts of violence and circumstances survived, with all the same experience of we need safety, dignity to speak up. And that's the cure. So when that formula was kind of clear in my head, that I'm not alone in this. This is something that affects so many people. Then that was such a strong drive that I couldn't stop. And before, I knew in this country, without experience in creating films, documentaries, producing, writing script. I remember I did not know how to. 2 words, how to spell manager, how to spell receive. And it was so funny. I just never didn't know it, but it was just I don't know how to spell even English well. Google autocorrect is going to help me. And I'm just going to wing it, and it's going to be great. So I was very, very persistent to raise money and to get to try to work with professionals and get them on board. That was the hardest part. To get filmmaking community to work with me was just impossible, because I was I'm a survivor. I'm from Serbia. I never made a film. I want to make a film about healing after trauma, and I'm going to include voices of perpetrators and victims. And people were just okay, I'm not going to work with this crazy woman. This doesn't sound good. And but we did it, and I'm so proud of what we made. And I think it's important. And I think that the voices of and accounts of aftermath for the perpetrators are very crucial to hear and understand, because actually that kind of gives us an answer. Why is it so difficult to reckon with aftermath of trauma? Why is it where these people collected safety to do that? As one of the perpetrators, child abuser, is sharing that he knew that the chances for this child to report what has happened to them is so low. So the chances are that he can get away with it. And the other perpetrators were sharing that this is their right to do so. If the woman is in their space, in their private space, in their house, what else one should expect?
I thought, your film Hold Me Right is beautiful. It's just beautiful, beautifully made. And what I love about it is the sort of the 360 look at this one horrible, violent act. And you have the victims, you have the perpetrators, you have family members, you have people who have grown into being an advocates and support and allies, and you have people who kind of just want to leave it behind and move on with their life. And it's just this 360 look at, this is what I mean about the blast radius. It has such a huge impact on so many different people. And what I love about your film is that it gets into all of those nooks and crannies, like the angles that you don't hear about, like the father who was talking about his daughter being raped and how he's reacting to it, and how he was saying, one of the things that really stood out for me, he said, an eye for an eye makes the world go blind. He's like, you don't know what it's like until it happens to you. I'm going to stand by my daughter. I'm going to support her. But I'm not going to continue violence by going after the person who violated her. Like, there's just like moments of just insight, like raw, real insight of what happens when this happens to you and all the people around you, and how people just make different decisions, and it's all okay. It's just how you're dealing with it is okay. So that was, super, super interesting. And the perpetrators, and I agree with you, like, some repenting, right? Like, I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway, but I understand the damage that I caused. It's unexcusable. Like, there's that. And there was this like, well, I didn't think it was such a big deal. I did it to some women and they were into it, and I did to other women, they weren't into it. And it's like, you just do it and see how it goes down. Like, that attitude. There was full out denial. Like, we were drunk and it didn't happen. I didn't rape her. The range of that experience they're reporting was also super interesting.
Oh, it's funny, the account of the men in a prison that were young, barely adult individuals, both drunk, and the lady reported rape. That's usually a topic for discussion for after the film, because people have divided opinions whether this man should have ended up in prison or not. So it's interesting to hear your take.
Yeah.
There's a moment in your film, too, where you show clips of movies and advertisements that highlight the environment and the society and the way of thinking that has not only allowed but encouraged men to show up that way. That they're these like little bits of things that seen together were shocking to me. I've likely seen them in movies and seen them certainly in ads, but to see them all clustered together painted such a picture of the lack of humanity of both women and children, and the dominance that men not only have but should have. And I thought, again, I think it painted the picture to why then those perpetrators had that mindset of, well, what was the problem? I mean, she resisted, but I don't understand what was wrong with that.
And like, it's funny, my dad is really into Westerns. It's one of his like secret delights. He'll just sit and watch, a Western every day. And then and when I was little, I would watch it with him. And now, I'm older. I sometimes catch him watching a Western and I sit there and watch it. It's incredible how much rape is in Westerns. Like, straight out rape. And then what happens is, a man, sometimes multiple men, like, just kind of overpower a woman, and it's rape for all intents and purposes, and then suddenly she's in love with him. And that is, we see this in early James Bond, we see it in adverts, we see it, this is such a thread that's run in our media, in our film, or in our series, and it's insidious. It's like, it's so ingrained in there. And I agree with Jackie, when I saw that montage of like all these different all these different and big ones like 007, it's like Star Wars, like all these like big classics have those moments when the hero is somehow like persisting and overpowering a woman, even if saying no, and she eventually gives in, and that's where love comes from. Like, there's the one scene where it's like, and this is real love, or something like that, and you're like, what? That's crazy.
Well, as I love to say, narratives are realities. Your narrative is our reality. So when we are wondering, like, where does this permission to violate come from? It comes from how we are brought up and how we are, what is our belief system. And there is a culture of permission. That's how we raised our boys, and hopefully not anymore.
So I'm curious, Daniela, having made the movie, spoken to, like, screened 400 people and eventually interviewed 40 people quite in depth, How has that experience expanded your understanding of your situation, your story, and sort of sexual assault in general? Like, what's changed for you?
So my idea of making the film for my own healing was that I will speak throughout them and I will hide my story because it's not safe for me to speak. And then only in the rough cut, I took courage to share my story, which was very troubling and scary at the time. And I'm so glad I've done it. And after the release of the film, it was premiered in Sarajevo Film Festival. Serbian media took it to questioning and speculations. I did not want to share the name of the perpetrator in a film or imply who that person is. So that's not the theme of the film, and frankly, it's not important. Like for my bigger mission to share the name of the perpetrator publicly. But the pressure arose. The public prosecutor opened an investigative case on a that's a criminal investigative case, and by the law of Serbia, I'm obligated by the law to participate as a witness. So I had to, and eventually I had to tell the name. And from the moment I shared the name to the police and the prosecutor, begging them to keep this case and not release to the media. The first next day, they spoke up publicly, like the spokesperson for the public prosecutor just spoke up publicly to say who the person is. And now I'm being kind of retaliated legally for speaking up by the perpetrator and by the government. They're basically they're aiming to raise criminal charges for false reporting of rape. But as I said, I never reported. I was called as a witness. I asked, witness of what? The prosecutor looks me in the eyes. Of your rape. That's hilarious. And then later on, the narrative should be that I should be put in prison for that. So I moved on from your question, but all this to say, I feel so happy and lucky and grateful to myself that I've spoken up. Speaking up is healing. Speaking up is empowering, and speaking up. So what happens when people speak up? When you are in silence, you are telling your body. So body keeps the score. It feels trauma. It holds it. And when you're silent, you're telling it, it didn't happen. You are telling it also, this should have happened. You shouldn't have, we don't need to deal with it. Nobody needs to know about it. And kind of you're sharing, like you're supporting the narrative of the perpetrator. It didn't happen. And when you're speaking out, you can share your story just to your loved one, just to your diary, just to a tree. You don't have to go and speak up publicly, but sharing it means that you are communicating with your being that this is not okay, and I am fighting it. Until you're in silence, there's in a way you're telling it it's okay. You're telling to everything that aches you and everything that you feel just less than and half of you, and you don't feel whole. You don't feel that you have agency, integrity, and voice, and you somehow standing with violence. I don't know how better to put it in a better, clear expression, but being silent is standing with violence. And if anybody's needs to hear this, it's the most healing thing is to speak, and that will become hard because the narrative of speaking is changing, and that's okay. First, very likely you will feel ashamed and kind of feel blaming yourself and feel uncomfortable. And that narrative is as the longer you speak, is just going to, if you find right listener and compassion, sometimes, as I said, compassion might be on a piece of blank paper or on a piece of blank canvas or on a piece of, musical instrument. Art is extremely healing for expressing this, but that narrative is going to start shaping. And it's incredible. I met people that are so strong and involved in human rights and fighting for human rights. And then later on, after seeing Hold Me Right, they started to speak up about something that happened decades ago. And even though they know everything about the process, logistically, psychologically, spiritually, they need to go through this ordeal. Whoa, I feel so ashamed, and I didn't do this right, and I'm blaming myself, and so all of these weights from culture they're blueprinted in us, and no matter how much you cognitively, kind of empirically know, you still have to go through that kind of a steps to empowerment by speaking up. So it takes a while. It's not like a one sharing and done. It takes a lot of speaking, and we as a society need to have eyes and ears for it, and just kind of listen and hold people in that space and have patience, and kind of healing and overcoming this will arise. And then I would love for all the curious Fox listeners to share a link to Hold Me Right film that will be available for after we release this podcast for 7 days. And we can share a special link if anybody would want to see Hold Me Right.
Absolutely. I would encourage, even sexual assault is nowhere near you. I would recommend this film because it's beautifully made, and it has some point of views that I haven't seen before in any other documentary that's made about this. So thank you so much for making it available for our listeners. I have one more question about the film. There was your experience, which is very real and raw, and you processed it, and and you at some point you realized you're healing. A part of the healing process is sublimating and making this film your art, which is it's your art, your expression. And having spoken to all these people, I'm curious if you had any realizations, any revelations that you didn't know before about sexual violence or rape. Anything that you heard from the people that you interviewed and was like, whoa, I never thought about that. And another sort of a sub question to that is, what is it that we don't talk about when it comes to sexual violence? Like, out in the world, we know what rape is. There's conversations about rape, but what is some of the deeper stuff that just never makes it?
I mean, making of Hold Me Right was selfishly my healing process, my learning process. So to answer your question, it was tons of things that I'm sharing today with you that I've learned throughout the film. I went into making this film with still blaming myself, feeling guilty, and feeling very scared to speak up. So this was a big trajectory. Still, the biggest take was, first, I stood with this in front of this brave survivors that shared their story with such grace, poise, freedom, and dignity. And I couldn't understand that one can do that. So that was a big take. Like, how did they get there? And that was my wish and my question. And another big take was which I shared about the perpetrator, that how would they got signals from our society that this is okay? And just to add, so even for the listeners that think that sexual violence is not in their arena, it is. It's actually, the statistics are so incredibly painful to understand how common sexual violence is. Still, most of us are still in silence. And this affects way too many, men and women and children than we ought to kind of brace with that fact. And so this actually concerns most of us. I mean, this was a great kind of correlations to that I've heard last week about COVID and COVID cases and long haul and deaths. I mean, sexual violence and sexual harassment has a much, we just normalize it, but the statistics of sexual violence and harassment are threefold than to the worst cases and statistics about COVID. Speaking of long haul, and speaking of suicides and femicides are still so common. So this is an epidemic, unfortunately, that we normalized and we live with. and we need to stand up, and our generation needs to be the one that says like, no, enough is enough. And by the time that we are old, Effy, my pledge is that we will not have to have these conversations and these types of podcasts, and that this will be something that is it's normal to stand on a side of a survivor, to believe survivor, that's a default as opposed to today. But believing one survivor, you are saving at least 3 or 5 around you, because it's always a ripple effect of that safety.
For sure. Yeah.
I would also just want to mention my current project is video game meant for young men. And it addresses sexual harassment in a form of an adventurous one-player mobile game, and in a very hidden and kind of it's a stealth approach to the subject. Imagine I call it the Way Out game is basically a Trojan horse filled with an agent of change. So you don't know that you're getting the subject. You're playing a very fun, adventurous, survival quest game, and that comes deep in, and it's all correlated, kind of like the gameplay and narrative and setting is all connected. And once you're already hooked and engaged, this topic very, very slowly just kind of enters its arena and helps you understand the consequences, and helps you understand that what is your role as an active bystander in a game. So hopefully we will teach and train young men to compassion and to listening and to understanding that kind of sexual misconduct and harassment is kind of, it's a gateway to sexual violence, and it should stop before it even happens.
And I love that you're going where young men are, to meet them where they're at, to teach them, to show them, and to teach them, to show them that stuff where they already hang out, which is beautiful, rather than just screaming at them from where they're not listening anyway. So I love your game idea, and we'll definitely include all the information for it and everything on the show notes as well, so people can click around and support you. I know you're raising funds for it right now, so it's a call out to anybody, whoever's interested, go and check it out. If you can support in any way, go ahead and do it. There's one last thing I want to ask you. We know each other from the sex positive community in New York City. We've hung out at parties together and explored polyamory at the same time. You've told me before how these communities were an integral part of your healing journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was very interesting. So from outside, when you're going to like a kind of a sex positive environments or sex parties or sexy parties or kind of sexy encouraged parties or social spaces, you think that there's going to be something kind of pressured over there. Yet for my troubled brain at the time, first time that I went into kind of a sex positive space and a sex party, there was a kind of a controlled environment that here I have witnesses. So I know that I was told, and I can clearly see, nothing will happen to me that I don't want it to happen to me. And my voice, my no, my silence, my insecurity will be heard, seen, and I will be safe. So this was the first environment that I was safe, and first environment that I was actually able to free myself sexually for the first time after the assault, the very first time. So it was extremely healing. So it's very funny from outside. It thinks that like, oh, this like, kind of like people that are going through in the aftermath of trauma should never go to a sex party. But this was actually extremely healing environment because it's actually kind of controlled. And this is instead of being alone with another person, you here have vouching witnesses. So nothing will happen to you that you don't want.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I completely see how that would work for you. And I also think that the way that those spaces are so explicit, you also feel like you know what's going to happen as well. Like it is not, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? It's verbal, it's explicit. So you also have control over what's happening. You don't have to guess. You don't have to assume. It's just very explicitly in front of you. I can also see how that can also be a piece of safety.
Well, it doesn't have to be kind of in front of me or like that I know what's going to happen. I can actually go with the flow and just surrender to the moment because I know that I can flow. Anything that I want kind of will happen, and everything that I don't want, it will be respected, kind of. So actually, it's not the kind of even kind of like a pre-given recipe, but rather ability to surrender to the moment, which is kind of I guess the core of sexual experience.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. I mean, I completely understand how that would work for you, and thank you for sharing that. This was amazing. I mean, I've known you for a long time, but this is really the first time I've heard your story end to end. Thank you for sharing. I know you're doing it out loud and you're just a part of your journey, but I do appreciate you just like taking your time and telling your story here for the podcast that you've supported for a very long time. So it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Effy. Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to support or find out more about the video game that Danijela is working on, you can visit wayoutgame.com or email her at info@wayoutgame.com. For more from Danijela Steinfeld, you can find her at Twitter at @DannySteinfeld_ and on Instagram at Danijela Steinfeld. Visit our show notes for a link and a special code to stream the film. And after you watch the documentary, visit the website to get a discussion guide to help you process and discuss the topics that emerge from the film. The guide is available at holdmeright.com/discussion-guide. All the links will be in our show notes. If you'd like to share your reactions to this conversation or the documentary, you can start a conversation on our Facebook group at We Are Curious Foxes. You can also visit our website at wearecuriousfoxes.com for episodes, blog posts, and resources on related topics and more under the umbrella of love, sex, and relationships. There are bonus cuts, mini episodes, online workshops, and a whole lot more available to you on Patreon at We Are Curious Foxes. Share this episode with someone who you think needs to hear it. And if this conversation meant something to you, leave a review for the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening. And if you haven't already, please follow us and leave a rating. This is how the podcast algorithm decides if it's going to recommend our show to others. If you have questions or a story that you'd like to share, you could send us an email or a voice memo at listening.wearecuriousfoxes.
This episode is produced by Effy Blue and Jacqueline Misler, with help from Yağmur Erkişi. Our editor is Nina Pollock, who helps us tell powerful stories episode after episode. Our intro music is composed by Dev Saha. We are so grateful for their work, and we're grateful to you for listening. As always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.